Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are and if you're tuning in live or on demand. If you are tuning in live, then do say hi in the chat room and get involved in the conversation. You are, of course, locked to SMAdvancedForum, or SMAF for short, the monthly roundup of our hosts and guests' views and opinions on the latest industry developments in and around the online audio sector. My name is Don Robinson, and as well as being a regular opinionated geek at numerous conferences and contributing editor for streamingmedia.com, my day job is looking after business development at Ideas, where we specialize in delivering carrier-class live encoding and stream software for online sports and news broadcasting. I am joined, as always, by my three co-hosts, by my three co-hosts, Tim, Eric, and Mark. Tim, first of all, how are you? How have you been? What have you been up to, sir? Please.
I'm doing well, Dom. As you can see, I've decided to add a new background as well. It's a background of about 50 chairs here at a business incubator where I'm doing some mentoring. But can't complain.
It's a virtual studio, isn't it, Tim?
Yeah, it is. It's ultimately virtual.
Perfect. Excellent. So what have you been up to?
Well, let's see. In the last month and a half, I've been playing around with some new compression schemes. Looking forward to IBC to show some of that stuff as the company comes out of stealth. And been working on a couple articles for Eric as well. He always seems to throw stuff at me just when I think I can't possibly handle one thing.
He's been brutal like that this summer, hasn't he? He's off on holidays. Like, oh, you couldn't get a couple of commissions in for, well, anyway, probably an appropriate moment to talk to him, but we won't quite yet. I shall
good way to segue into Eric at this point.
Yeah, no, let's not do Eric yet. We keep to the script this week. Mark, how are you? Mark, you out there?
I am, sir. How are you?
Excellent. Yeah, not bad. What have you been up to this last month?
Oh, I took a couple weeks off, actually, which is unusual for me. And since then, I've just gotten back in the saddle. We're building a studio for a customer in Hollywood. I was working on a pretty advanced, innovative video-enabled app. So they're building out a full-on studio. We're building in some ultra-low latency capabilities into their mix, and everything is going to be fully NDI enabled for those new tech fans out there. So it should be fun. We're learning a lot as we go here because it's pretty new technology. And of course, we've been working on a lot of music festivals. Did Love Loud in Salt Lake City. We just got done with the Made in America Festival in Philadelphia. So it's been a busy few weeks.
You don't do the Burning Man, do you?
No.
I am dying to go to that.
I've never been, and I would like to go one of these days. Yeah.
A friend of mine is quite involved with doing lighting stuff there. Anyway, he was telling me all about it. Very exciting. Must get out. Anyway,
is lighting that he does burning, or is it actually just real lights?
No, it's real lights. It's quite an amazing light show. I'll find a video of it, but not right now because I'll get distracted and I'm already juggling too many balls. So let me also introduce our other regular host, Eric. Are you out there? How are you?
I am here. I am busy as always, coming up with various and sundry things for you guys to write about and assigning those stories at the last minute.
You're all geared up for IBC and for Streaming Media West coming up, right?
Getting there. We should be posting the first round of speakers for Streaming Media West on the Streaming Media West program website this week, and I'll be spending the next few weeks. That's one of my goals at IBC is corralling people and asking them to speak and hoping they can join us at that event. Also been working on, in the next issue of Streaming Media, we have our annual, well, it used to be the Streaming Media 100, which you and Tim and our other regular contributors help us pick every year, the list of the 100 most influential, important, and interesting companies in the industry. This year, we decided to make it a little more exclusive and narrow the list down to 50. So I know who's on the top 50 list in about a month. So will you.
I don't even try anymore because of that small print which says that employees can't be involved. So. Excellent. Right. Well, Tim, will you take us to our first guest? Find out who our first guest is.
Yeah, certainly. So our first guest is Espen, and I think Espen, you met Eric probably first of all out of all of us, didn't you, at the Nordics TV Summit? Is that right?
Yes, I met Eric a few times, and once there as well.
So give us your title and tell us a little bit about your company.
So I'm Espen Erikstad. I'm the COO of Norwegian Media. So Norwegian Media, we we work in the TV video industry, basically working with pay TV operators, TV channels, and broadcasters, and so on, and help them with their OTT services. We do a lot of front-end app development work, but we also have a hosted video platform that we host and manage some of their services. So, and I'm responsible for basically our product development, and with that meaning I'm working a lot with our customers and projects as well.
And I think between the time that you and I met back in February and now, you all have also done a conference, haven't you? Was that Northern Waves? Is that what it's called?
Exactly. Yeah. In May, we arranged a conference here in Oslo. I'm located in Oslo, by the way, Oslo, Norway, and we did a TV tech conference here in Oslo, and it was a great success actually, and we had a lot of fun doing it. There was a lot of work to put it together, but in the end, yeah, we had a lot of the local guys and some international guys showed up. We had a good line of speakers. Erik helped out with on the moderation side, so it was quite professional as well. So yeah, it was a lot of fun. So that was like a side project that we did on top of everything else.
Don't call Erik professional; it'll go to his head.
All right, Dom, go ahead and pass on to Mark.
So, Mark, now our next guest is slightly special. You introduced me to the person. I'm picking my words carefully here. Probably 2 years ago at Streaming Media East or something, and it's really good. Well, please take it away. Please introduce our next guest.
Yeah, I actually met her first a few years ago at Streaming Media West, and some of you may remember her from her tenure at Nice People at Work. She's for about the past, I think, year and a half, Diane. She's been the founder and CEO of DataZoom, which is an innovative video logistics company. And she happens to be, believe it or not, I'm slightly ashamed to say, our first woman panelist in the history of SMAF. So welcome, Diane.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Tell us a little bit about DataZoom.
Yeah, so, DataZoom, we started, as you said, about a year and a half ago. We launched at NAB this past year, our adaptive video logistics platform. And the first service that we brought to market is our data capture and routing service. We actually just released yesterday a big new release launching our data pipeline. So I guess traditionally, when you think about how we capture client-side data, you usually think of it in the context of analytics and different types of platforms that detect audience or quality of experience and measure those as a vertical stack. So you have collectors collect the data, you then process the data, and then you use out of the box these metrics and dashboards that a company provides. And what we've done is created some horizontal efficiency with the data capture layer. So we basically allow you to configure, use a remotely configurable dynamic beacon that's a one-time, one line of code, copy-paste integration on the player. And then using our interface, you select the data points you want to gather and even the tools where you want to send this data to. So it's a really new approach to data. It's really taking that out of the context of just analytics. And the plan is to do some really cool stuff with this real-time data source that we have coming in. So that's what we'll be launching the end of this year, is our automation platform. So
excited. Very cool. It's been neat to see it come to fruition. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
You bet. So where are we at, Dom?
Right, so my video dropped out briefly there because it's proper streaming tech. But I think we're still on there because we have backups and so on. So right, let's move to the first story. Tim, do you want to? More to the point, we want to get the story out of Espen. Tim, elicit the first story out of Espen.
All right. So as everybody knows, we do Flipboard, and Dom's going to flip the board up onto here. There was an article around microservices. Espen, you want to just talk briefly about what the article said and sort of your take to it? You're a software guy, and obviously virtualization has come to our industry just like it has to a lot of other industries. But what does microservices do from an impact standpoint, streaming as a whole?
Yeah, no, I think you know, our industry has been well, I have the feeling that it's a bit late to the party, and I think a lot of reason for that has been that especially operators have been buying platforms, big platforms from big companies, and the monolith architecture has been kind of dominating a lot. And of course, Netflix inventing microservices and inventing this architecture, and the huge benefit that such architecture can have in terms of replacing components, adding features and functionality, and now with containers and all that operationally, it's a huge leap to take to if you're able to manage this in a proper way. Because I mean, how these services are today is really a innovation game and a time to market. And you know, if the competitors are really quick on adding features and functionality and platforms and all that, and they have an architecture that allows for that, you will be on the losing end. So yeah, I think it's interesting to see that, you know, it is starting to happen, and people are starting to deploy this as well. I think more in the broadcast side, I can see that it's people are adopting this a bit quicker and better. But it's yeah, I don't think people should underestimate kind of the power of doing microservices in terms of speeding up the development of features. And
I fully agree from a feature set standpoint and the ability, as you said, to rapidly respond to changes in the marketplace. My question has always been with containerization, whether it's Kubernetes, whether it's doing some form of monolithic, as you're talking about with Azure and AWS, what are the scalability impacts of virtualization and containerization? Because I know in the high transaction market in databases, a lot of initial development will be done in a container, but then they'll move it on to a more monolithic system because containers inherently don't scale super well.
Yeah, I mean, and that is of course a fair point, that to reach the scale on certain aspects, I mean, like scaling for traffic and all that, you can do, but when it comes to, you know, storing huge amount of data and things like that, sometimes it is more efficient. So, but it's really about understanding this game and using the right tools for the job, right? So it's not about, yeah, you hear about microservices and Docker and containers and Kubernetes, and then yeah, everything should be that. You know, it's always about having a pragmatic approach to it and find the right tool for the job. So
Agile was the tool at one point, or the model at one point, and we've all sort of moved off to other things.
Yeah, but of course, I think also these, you know, the opportunity to, because we talk a lot about like hybrid deployments, you know, that you can utilize the public cloud and you can utilize your own data centers and so on. And really about these containers is it's so powerful in terms of that, because you can deploy that Docker container on Amazon as well as Google Cloud, as well as your own data center in the same way, and that kind of flexibility is quite valuable.
You guys are all asking me to chip in. I'm messing around with the video, trying to get the flipboard up on screen here. So, but yeah, unfortunately, slightly embarrassing. That was my article, wasn't it? Which seems people are reading, which is weird. Eric, what are you doing? You're getting news out there to people. But no, it is an interesting space. It's not always the solution. You know, I think there are certain hardware limitations. Depends what you're trying to do, but when you're trying to play with GPUs and things like that that are a little bit limited in availability and things like public clouds, you can't. It's not a panacea to just put your microservice into a container and deploy it. But you know, if you're certainly in a private cloud where you can control the hardware environment, it's a perfectly usable dynamic model. What I have seen is a lot of people putting their monolith in a container, and then claiming that they're delivering microservices, and that's not the same thing at all. You know, just taking your, I'm going to pick on something that's out of circulation now, but you know, picking on something like Adobe Flash server and sticking that into a container does not constitute microservices, and I have seen that being done quite a lot actually by people. You know, the whole point is to really componentize the architecture so that you can scale just those bits that you need to scale. And there's still a lot of learning to be done, both in the OTT world and in, you know, fintech and retail and other spaces as well.
And Dom, I'm curious. Sorry, Diane. I was going to say, since I don't know Diane's model for her company, I'm curious from a containerization standpoint what you've done.
Yeah, I was going to chime in on that. So we are containerized as well, and part of our value proposition is built into our name at DataZoom is that we're capturing data with very low latency, actually sub-second latency guaranteed under SLA from the time that we, you know, capture the data coming out of the player and move it to this third-party service. And we are using public cloud. And I think this is where some of the newer technologies like machine learning can actually help you to scale using microservices and actually maintain that high availability, even on public cloud. And it's a difference of essentially being able to have different algorithms for the different clouds that you're using that helps you understand the limitations of that particular cloud service and therefore tweak your algorithms to auto scale in a way that's appropriate for each service that you're using. But it's definitely not a one size fits all type of approach. You definitely have to customize. We've had to customize our infrastructure to meet the limitations of every single service out there that we've tested out. So, yeah.
We're seeing a lot, and I think we're seeing, you know, obviously the buzzwords Kubernetes and Docker are everywhere. There have been a couple of years you've seen those around. Kubernetes has really stormed forward as the dominant player for orchestration. Docker for container as well, but there are other ways to deliver containers. They're just possibly not as neatly set up and usable in some ways. But and obviously we in our own context we use Erlang, so a lot of you can containerize Erlang, but you don't need to. You still have all the service isolation and stuff that you get. So there's different approaches out there. But what certainly from while I was writing the article, I was reflecting on the fact that if anyone isn't approaching their service architecture this way, they're dead in the water, really. They're just going to sink slowly. It is the future of software architecture, I think. Cool. Okay. Well, let's not linger on my article because that's a bit narcissistic. So let's move on. Diane, I want to just take a moment. Can you just tell us about your group that are meeting up at IBC? I don't want to segue into IBC as a whole yet. I think we can talk about.
Yeah, definitely. So there's a group of women that got together in our industry. There are women in this industry, believe it or not. And we got together and created this Women in Streaming Media group. And we're actually having our first meetup at IBC. If you are a fancy, amazing woman, please come in the morning at 9 a.m. to the Grand Cafe on the 15th and join. I think there's over 60 of us that are going to be out there. But essentially the purpose of the group is to improve the visibility of women in the space and grow diversity within the streaming media industry and provide channels for networking and mentorship and even internships. So we're going to try and grow women in the space and bring more women into the space. And of course, we need everybody, men and women, to be encouraging of this new and awesome group. So hoping that we'll be inviting key people from our industry, key executives and key thought leaders to join and network with our members as well. So if you're interested in sponsoring too, let us know.
Well, also, we want to proudly say that we've asked Diane to get us looped in with the group so that every single SMAF from here on forward will include at least one female guest. I think that's really important. Bit of positive discrimination.
Exactly. I love it.
Yeah, yeah. It takes me back to the gentlemen's clubs in London, but inside out. I think it's a good thing.
Exactly.
Fantastic. Okay, so Diane, you picked some topics before we started. What was foremost in your mind as we were?
We were talking about CDN capacity, and essentially, I think there's a lot of there's some articles that are up there about. We always hear about new POPs that are being released, and how that's supposed to make essentially the CDN better. And I think the point of one of the articles that here is essentially that we shouldn't be judging the quality of a CDN based upon the number of POPs that they have. Because ultimately, the CDN is just one step in a supply chain. And actually, this is some of the stuff that we're looking at DataZoom, which is basically that data, independent of context is not very helpful. So, for example, detecting that there's been a buffering event on the client side it's good to know that there's been an issue, but unless you can identify where the breakage has been, it's not as useful. So bringing it back to the CDN topic, CDN, of course, is just one step within this video delivery process that oftentimes you will then pass this file on to a transit provider who then will pass it on to the ISP to reach the end user and at their device and bring the content to their device. And I think some of the I've actually been surprised within our space that I think because a lot of the people in streaming media will buy CDN, they're not super familiar with what happens after the CDN has done its job and that they're actually passing this off to a transit provider. And I think we should be judging actually CDNs more by their transit capacity equally as their own capacity. Because if you think about supply chain and logistics, your efficiency is truly limited by whatever next step in the process is out there. And you find out that essentially some of these CDNs are making transit contracts, and some of them don't even have an SLA. And there's some that have, and there's even two different levels. There's, best effort, which is no SLA, but they're going to try, I guess. And then there's this no effort SLA, which is like, yeah, I guess whenever the capacity is there, you can try and push it. And I think for the context of the video space, we really need to be understanding how our CDNs are making deals and partnerships with either with transit providers and what types of contracts they have, or how many direct connections they have to an ISP where you can begin to guarantee capacity down the pipe to make sure that your video is getting there correctly. So that was an interesting approach, and it's something that I've always been curious about, which is it doesn't really matter how many pops there are if what's happening next, if that next level of transition of that file is not adequate.
I think in the CDN context, most of the delivery is best effort. I mean, obviously TCP is a best effort protocol when it's done over here anyway. I also think that CDNs make it a bit of a habit to try to paint a picture that capacity is scarce, because that fear allows them to drive price.
Totally.
And I am becoming increasingly cynical about that sale, because I think that some of the connectivity between networks and so on has got so much latent capacity in there that actually it's pretty easy to dial it up by increasing wavelengths or simply increasing, the bit rate that you're committing to over a transit pipe and so on. And I think
and Dom, I would add that historically, if you remember back when Tony Greenberg started ramp rate, the whole thing was basically taking multiple CDN proposals that had been brought in and comparing them across baselines. And what we found was precisely what you said, was the moment that transparency was there, all of a sudden DWDM endpoints began to increase capacity exponentially. So yeah, you're right. The scarcity model is exactly what drives the concept of the CDN. The POPs is merely just it's another selling point on your spec sheet, so to say.
And I think few enough people sit and actually take the trouble to learn about how carriers interconnect and how that traffic is actually managed. And if you like, take the ISP to telco view of things. I think people are sort of treat the internet as a finite quantity. The internet actually doubled in available capacity last year.
Wow.
Dialed from 195 terabits to 395 terabits just in 2017, just by lighting up fibers. So when there's this kind of, oh no, the internet's going to fall over, we can't, there's no capacity out there. Yeah, maybe if you're trying to sell proxy servers or edge cache. But
I agree that that's a false premise, but I think it's also a matter of audience too. If you're, a professional who integrates or resells CDN services and that sort of thing, it's important for you to understand, how everything gets handed off and transit providers and things like that. But if you're a content owner, content creator, and you don't care, you don't have the, capacity to understand all of the inner workings of how a CDN operates, size is really the only, metric that matters. I find in a lot of situations, they just want to know, what's your global footprint? Because we might want to do this, we might want to do that. It's not so much an application-based thing as a, just all told in this fully commoditized, product. How do you compare to the next, two on the list? It's really all that they want to know, and they don't really care to know any more than that. You find that's the same?
Are you saying, Mark, that the equivalent of McDonald's when they say, do you want to go from a medium to a large, supersize me, that if it's good for the content provider at the nominal level, that they'll go ahead and pay that extra 20% just because it sort of quote unquote guarantees their stuff?
I don't think they are paying the extra 20% though. I mean, take the top 3 CDNs. Who is, who's offering the bargain basement pricing on, let's say, HLS delivery, and who's not, who's charging a premium? I find I can buy Akamai and Limelight and Level 3 for basically the same rates for a delivery. So at some point it becomes about the service offering, that's the layer that's on top of the actual delivery. And if I'm Disney, or a better example, if I'm a much smaller content provider and I just want to get my my 3 or 4 OTT channels and some live events or that sort of thing out via HLS, what do I care about transit providers and all of the inner workings when I just need to know okay, if I'm paying 4 cents a gig for HLS delivery through all 3 of these providers, who's the biggest? Like, I don't need to know all the metrics. I just need to know, who's least likely to fall over for my 4 cents a gig. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, but I think the difference potentially is that we've been associating the size of the footprint with the size of the quality and reliability and resilience of the CDN. And I think it'd be interesting if we began to look at CDN delivery a little differently. And so I had a conversation recently with Lance Crosby, who's the CEO of StackPath, that new CDN that just kind of came out of nowhere. It was an acquisition of Max CDN and Highwinds and a few other services put together. And his approach is actually really different. It's basically, they're not going for a huge edge footprint. They're essentially having huge capacity inside of the I think top 100 internet exchanges worldwide, and really focusing on building more, peering and connections with, directly with ISPs, not having to rely so much upon transit providers. Because I think, again, part of it is, okay, do you have the capacity? But I think the main issue is actually not CDN capacity anymore. I think they're smart enough to be able to route around some of the issues. It's actually the next step in the delivery chain, which is potentially the transit provider, and how many one or several hops that transit provider is pushing that video file through that the CDN has no control over. So he's taking a markedly different approach to building out his CDN, which is, focusing on not on having all of these pops, but on having a huge presence inside of specific, internet exchanges. It'll be interesting to see how, they're definitely going after some big content distributors right now, how the results appear at the end of the day, and how they're able to perform in comparison to some of the traditional models, which focus on points of presence.
And we had Limelight on last time. Sorry, Espen. We had Limelight on last time, and essentially they're trying to drive down latency by having fewer points of presence as well. Espen, you were going to say?
Yeah, no, I just say that I see a lot of these service providers that deploy the multi-CDN, and that they use multiple CDN for their services, then they can switch. And of course, as you said, it's really a combination of CDN, ISP, a lot of times that dictates the quality. So some CDN can work perfectly fine with one ISP, and but really poorly with another, just because of this peering and transits and so on. And I think when the tech gets better here as well, you can really analyze how CDN operates, and you can automatically pick and choose the best CDN for that exact stream. And when you put rates into the picture as well, I think this automatically will increase both the quality and the continue to push the rates down on the CDN as well.
So something else interesting that I picked up in the CDN space is the cost benefit analysis of deploying caches near a very loosely defined edge is now starting to really seriously include power. And actually, I'm midway through an article for the magazine on this one, which is, I was talking to one of the guys who runs one of the big 5 networks, and he's very much their network visionary, if you like. And he was talking about how their concern isn't really about where the peerings and the transits are, so much as where the power meets the junctions and where they can more effectively deploy. He was giving the sort of gradings, the 140 gigawatt, the 50 gigawatt, and the 1 gigawatt power. And particularly as 5G is emerging, and I think I'm going to try and drive this as a bit of a topic for Content Delivery World this autumn as well. I think as 5G is arriving, we're now looking at more power, deeper in the edges. You've got a higher density of masts and a larger volume of client devices. So actually things like the efficiency of a codec now need to be considered or compression with a codec, or transcoding with a codec, and so on. Those things now need to be measured in watts as much as they're measured in bits per second, and so on. And I think that's going to be a transformative view through the industry over the next 12 months from my own point of view.
And what's funny, Dom, about that is if you go back and look at SLICs and the traditional telco, the service huts, so to speak, when DSL first came out, DSLAMs, the problem was actually that very thing. It was the power consumption at a SLIC wasn't high enough to allow everyone in the neighborhood to have DSL. Obviously, efficiencies both in power increasing and the decrease of power consumption with those kinds of telco devices help drive that. But you're right, 5G is brand new. I'm curious though, Espen, from your standpoint, you are in in the pan-Nordic market and in the pan-European market. We have the CDNs that are US based. Are you finding that there are better models in Europe? Federation had been a big conversation a couple of years ago in Europe, and we really haven't heard much about that. How does the market look there?
No, so how it looks is that, especially in Scandinavia, and I think throughout Europe as well, is that, we see that the big guys there are deploying edges like crazy inside ISP networks, and so the international big guys like Akamai and so on, they have very good coverage here. So, but I also seen that Amazon has been taking quite big market share also here, also in terms of the CDN. And but interesting, I think both here in Norway and Sweden, I've seen that some broadcasters and operators, they're getting together and they are making their own CDNs. So because the tech is there, it's all HTTP based now anyway. So you can do, especially for video on demand, it's not that much of a rocket science to build a okay CDN for VOD. And I see a few initiatives like that actually they're putting some engineering together. They're working, of course, directly then with the ISPs and so on, and they say, okay, let's build some capacity ourselves based on just using open source tech like Nginx and so on. And so yeah, this is it will be interesting to see how kind of that takes off, if it's like more these home in-house built CDNs will take more of that traffic or not.
I think I always like these models where CDNs have failed to offer a valuable service externally to networks, and now they're licensing their software into the networks, and usually they're doing that in the terms of sending the network operators their own bandwidth back to them. It always amuses me. Call me a cynic. Now, Mark, you're saying which one, AV1 or Disney? You choose, sir. Which was your topic of the topic?
Well, if you want me to pick my favorite article, I've been flipping through the Flipboard over the past couple of days, and there's an article in there about Disney's new streaming service. which was announced like a year ago, and they're finally getting around to really talking about what the initiative is going to include, and they haven't named it yet, but they're talking about pricing and things like that. And I thought the most interesting quote in the piece is Bob Iger, the CEO of Disney, saying that it's going to be their top priority for 2019 over everything that's happening with their film properties, the Disney parks, the Disney ABC television group. All of that comes second to their new streaming service, and I find that interesting and kind of telling as to the state of our industry right now. That a behemoth like Disney would consider, what could be a small initiative for them, their very largest priority for the coming year. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I say something. I think it's definitely interesting, but I'm not sure if they have any choice. I mean, they have to do this and to go all in when they're first doing this. I guess they're pulling their content agreements from Netflix and things like that. So they need to, when they're saying they're offering an end user service, they have to do it, and they have to do it properly. And of course, if they're starting to pull out of content agreements with distributors and so on, they really need to have that service for end users if they're going to, to continue to be that giant of a company that they are.
I agree. It'd be interesting to have to get some detail on the quote as to whether he's talking about, dollars spent, head count for, the teams that are going to be, pushing the product out and that sort of thing. I don't know what biggest means, but what were you going to say, Diane? I
was just going to say that I think that it's interesting. There's a few companies out there who have, so I think if you look at some of the recent acquisitions and roll-ups in the space, I think what you begin to see is that since so many people are watching video, it's a great way to capture data about people and that are potentially traversing between their owned and operated pages and sites online versus things that are going on offline. And I think potentially one of the interesting focuses of Disney launching the service is, and it'll be interesting to see what they end up doing with this, is really the data that they're gathering. So they might be investing a lot in the streaming service, and alone the P&L, who knows how impressive it's going to be, but maybe the data behind that they're getting from launching this online service can actually assist them in some of their other business units as well, in terms of translating from what someone watches or an advertisement they see online versus, what actually happens offline. So, for example, I know that, the recent acquisition of Time Warner, I think one of the interesting parts of that is that they had developed the service that allowed them to essentially correlate data coming from, for example, location data from an app versus if someone had seen an advertisement for a brick and mortar store that was pushed through one of those sites. And I'm curious to see if part of the interest for Disney to build out this great service is to be able to do those types of, massive data correlations that ultimately result in higher, ad dollars or better targeting and marketing for users of premium services to be able to, get more from visitors, even through their parks and things like that.
Yeah, I think, Diane, that's an interesting point where you're essentially looking at user behavior and consumption. I also think at this point, though, any media company that isn't doing streaming or saying that they're doing streaming, that their market direction is going to move negative. So there was a long time where people resisted, big companies resisted going into streaming because they felt like it would cannibalize. In fact, Eric, I think if you remember when HBO's president came and talked about the HBO on demand, the question was asked, could you watch it without having a subscription to HBO? And he said explicitly at that point, we don't want to cannibalize our cable for the 10% of revenue we're going to make off streaming. Clearly that model shifted. And so to me, I think we're at this point where Disney has to announce, even if they're not ready, because the question is, you talked about it a year ago, you haven't done anything, what's the holdup? And so to me, it ultimately seems like it's a table stakes move as well. For that.
They've always said it wasn't going to launch until 2019, though. That's not a new.
Okay, fair enough. But But I do think that it now, for media companies, they have to say they have a streaming initiative. They have to push their streaming initiatives forward.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I think that so much of the attention is online, and there's so much value essentially from owning your own audience online, that essentially if you are a major media company, that you have to have some sort of owned and operated presence.
I'll throw in a question to everyone really on that one. Do you think that Disney entering as a potentially serious contender to Amazon Film and Netflix, do you think that competition is going to be something interesting as innovation? I mean, the theory is more competition, more innovation. Or do you think they're just going to launch a Me Too service?
That's a great question. I mean, I think that there's so much that obviously Disney has vast resources. They have a lot of other experience with parks and other things that might allow them to create new and innovative, immersive experiences. So I think it would be underutilizing probably some of their unique knowledge and experience if they didn't do something innovative. But I think at the same time, I think a lot of consumers still just need some entertainment when they're sitting on the sofa. So I imagine that they're still going to push for a lot of,
it's going over here. It's going to be very
food type.
When they finally rebrand Sky, which is our equivalent of Fox, when they rebrand Sky as Disney News, it's going to be kind of weird. It's probably the right name, but I wouldn't like to go there.
And you had another article in the Flipboard, Dom, that talked about the possibility of Amazon going after landmark cinemas. And I think, to Diane's point, what's interesting is there's meat space and there's online. And ultimately, you have to have something in both of those. Disney has it with the entertainment venues that they have. But Amazon is essentially looking to move to say, we're going to go from online to offline. So if you want to go to an entertainment venue that we own, you can do that. And to a certain extent, what we're seeing is an even greater consolidation of entertainment than what we even had maybe 10 years ago. And I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing from a monopolistic standpoint in the US, but it could be a good thing if they want to expand the brands overseas and more than just Amazon.
I just hope it leads to some innovation. I think it's always exciting when it's changing and doing new stuff. And if it's just more films from more diverse choice, that's actually kind of frustrating.
Well, I think in that it's Disney. I mean, they've got the content. They don't need to innovate. Can they? Yes. Will they? I don't think they will in phase one of this platform, because they just simply don't need to. So yeah, driving innovation and integrating with their other properties and the parks and the immersive experiences that they have and that sort of thing, that I think will probably come later as they have to diversify in the face of other competing content. But I don't think there is competing content for a lot of their properties right now, especially not for Marvel, Disney, Pixar. Their main properties, they own those markets. So.
Cool. So we've got about 15 minutes left. We need to get Eric to pick his topic out of the hat and talk us through that. And then we need a little roundup of what's coming next week. But Eric.
Well, actually, I'm going to pick one of Tim's topics, which was an article that was in the Flipboard that Variety were reporting that fraud. What was the headline? Fraud has become the latest hurdle for music streaming, talking about the ways that music streaming services like Spotify and Tidal might be gaming the system in terms of the amount of royalties that they pay, the number of listens. And there's always a tension there because on one hand, of course, Spotify and Tidal want to report more listeners and more listens. If they do that, though, they have to pay more royalties. But, the thought that there would be fraud in streaming music services is and that would be any different from any previous version of the music industry is kind of naive, and it gives me an excuse to bring up one of my favorite Hunter S. Thompson quotes, where he said, "The music business is a cruel and shallow money trench, a long plastic hallway where thieves and pimps run free and good men die like dogs." There's also a negative side, but I mean, whether it's SoundScan sales or pre-SoundScan record keeping of music sales. Payola in the radio industry, the music industry has always had this element, and so I don't think it's any surprise that we're beginning to see it on the on the part of the streaming services. Tim, what was your take on the article?
Yeah, I was going to say, Eric, first, it's an interesting segue from the conversation we were just having about Disney, because for Disney, if they're making the pitch that they're going to do this and they're going to dominate the market, their numbers better add up to them dominating the market, or else they risk a further problem with, with investors and like that. My take here is fascinating that the artists have also figured out how to game the system, in the fact that as albums have come out in the last year or so, you'll hear it's the best-selling album ever, and what you realize is that it's every 13 plays of an album counts as a sale of an album. And so you've had artists saying to their listeners or their fans, please just put it on 24-hour repeat. And then that means that in that period of time, they get 2 sales for every person who streams. So it is an interesting model of balance between Spotify wanting to say, they're growing fast, or Tidal saying they're growing fast, versus having to also stave off this, I wouldn't call it fraud, but certainly gaming the system that some artists are doing to get additional pay.
Well, even that's not new. I mean, Garth Brooks has long been the king of gaming SoundScan. In the last couple of years, he released a book of his writings or photographs. I don't know. I didn't open it up. But when you purchase that book, you got every one of his albums. And each one of those counts as another sale. Even though most of the people purchasing that book almost surely had all of those albums before, artists are now including albums with ticket purchases, as a way, again, to more units. So that's what it's always come down to. And
I think in the music space, especially too, I mean, I can't remember the last time I paid specifically for an album or a song, because I have, premium SoundCloud and Spotify and things like that. So I think we've, the value of, what is the value of an album sale at this point versus paying a premium to services like those who are going to, push your content, and really the rights to that. So I understand that we basically we've been using the same measurement for popularity of video streaming, and it definitely has to be adapted and changed for, this new era where there's hyper availability of everything. And one way to address that would be with better data, and coming up with better metrics through better data. So it'll be interesting to see. You can definitely sort out between, album sales that come from, sales that come from pushing a book versus actual purchases online. And maybe we just have to come up with different metrics.
I think there was another story in the Flipboard this month that Amazon's around sort of warming up a new version of its streaming music platform to try and take on Apple and Spotify. And I think that once their pot of gold is available to the rights societies, I think we'll probably see the models change again. I could well see Amazon loss leading piles of rights just to massively give away its music at a lower price. Because for them, it's just more bandwidth. It lowers the cost of other operations and so on. So I can see the industry sort of being patronized by Amazon and Spotify. Well, Spotify subscribers, but I don't know how much you can squeeze out of an Amazon Prime account, really.
Yeah, I think the data and all this is really interesting because essentially, and this when you think about. In the video space, you have companies like Nielsen that have come in and tried to measure audience and popularity of content and things like that, which drive advertisers to spend dollars and drive higher CPMs and CPC rates and all these other things, which they're doing. And I don't know, I think some of those metrics and the way that we measure those things also needs to evolve as well. I was actually having a discussion with someone in our space, complete segue from the music, sorry, but how we essentially track and monitor the delivery of SSAI, and it basically comes down to that they're missing out on charging advertisers because the metrics are too limiting. The metrics that are out there are you need to reach the 75% mark. Well, what if you got to the 70% completion mark? What are you willing to pay for that? And I think there's a whole evolution that's data driven that comes from being able to track things better and maybe even remove the intermediation of some of those types of services. Where imagine a world where campaigns are sold directly from an advertiser campaign. Well, I guess the publisher would directly communicate and sell campaigns and run metrics with the advertiser directly, so they could get take more advantage of some of the inventory that they're automatically giving up. If you have some of the data that's available to be more creative with how you sell advertising slots on content, regardless if it's audio or video.
Cool. Okay, listen, we got one more little topic just to squeeze in. Eric, tell us about this Huawei one you posted this afternoon.
Oh, yeah. A few weeks ago, a jury in Texas, I believe, awarded essentially a patent troll, $7.7 million in damages from Huawei because and I'm just pulling up the article here, because the jury decided that Huawei infringed upon an H.264 related patent, and that the patent wasn't covered by fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory requirements. Long story short, Jan Ozer, who wrote the article that's on our site, what this means is unclear, but it could mean that folks who or companies that are delivering devices that encode and decode H.264 are going to have to pay a lot more royalties. So, this is a topic that comes up again and again, just when we think the royalty situation has kind of been figured out. There's a new wrinkle. I don't think any of us were expecting a new wrinkle in H.264. Most of us have been focused on what's going to happen with HEVC.
Seriously, we got a letter about ZTE taking some action about some patents within the MPEG-LA group for our codec licensing a couple of weeks ago. It was just another email I just put into the to deal with one day box. But I think people are out to get those licensing authority groups at the moment. I think they're seen as a little pot of gold that you can attack. So I'm not surprised you talk about patent trolls.
Yeah, and historically though, Eric, I've dealt with Huawei since the video conferencing days, so my pre-streaming days. So I guess that was 25 years ago. Historically, Huawei has been known as a clone and copy company. In fact, Cisco successfully sued them for patent infringement years ago around routers. So I think it's a perfect storm. It's Texas. That particular East Texas judge is really good on patents, and in fact, Huawei tried to get it moved out of Texas, and that was disallowed by Gilstrap, who was the judge. And Huawei being known as being somebody who clones and copies, I wonder if that actually had something to do with the amount. Because obviously they were found guilty, but the amount itself, I think, seems almost like trying to send a message as much to China as it is to patent infringers or potential patent infringers.
Oh, I had a request to unmute Espen, but it sounds like there's a traffic jam outside you there, chap.
Yes, it is. So I think I need to be muted a bit.
Okay, no worries. Okay, so let's move on to the last few minutes now. I'm going to reach for something very, very important so we all understand what's going on next week. It is, of course, IBC. We're into IBC weeks, folks. So what are you all doing? What's your plans? What's going on?
Dom. When I think of Heineken, I think of whose place was it that we stayed at? Arian's.
Yeah.
But what I really liked was the half-price sushi place that was between Arian's and the Heineken.
Oh yeah, sushi, Heineken sushi. It was a perfect accommodation. That. Very good. So what have you got planned? What have you spotted, guys? Let's go along the list. Diane, what are you going to do at IBC? Of course, you've got your 9 o'clock Saturday morning meetup, which you'll be in attendance at. Which
is right after all the parties on the 14th. So it's going to be struggle city in the morning. Lots of coffee will be required to run this meetup.
I'll still be up, so that'll be easy.
But yeah, no, I think for us, where we're going to be showing off our data pipeline solution to customers, and so that's pretty much my focus. Unfortunately, I probably won't see much of the light of day outside of the lovely exhibit halls.
Cool. Which hall and which number are you on?
We're actually in the IAMB. I can never remember the acronym. Yes, we're meeting up in there, and then I'll be probably traversing Hall 14 mainly. So
cool, Eric. Yeah. What about you? What's your plan? What's your footfall for the weekend?
You know what? I have a feeling we're really at a it seems like this is something of a tipping point this year. And I think there are going to be a lot of companies exhibiting at IBC, none of them on this webcast, of course, who might not be around in a year.
I think you're right.
What's that?
I think you're very right, actually. I think that's a very true statement.
So would you care to elaborate?
Well, no, I just think, the bottom line is, it starts with the consumer. If we're talking about OTT, and consumers can only realistically subscribe to a finite number of services before they start scaling back and figuring out which ones they really like, or they bounce from service to service, month to month. Oh, HBO's got something I want to see. I'll pay for a month of it and then I'll drop it. And so I think we're going to see more of that, and that's going to have an impact on the number of vendors in the space. And you combine that with the sort of move that Dom wrote about in his microservices article, where some of the big players in the industry, like Sky, are doing things in-house with containerization and microservices, and that's going to have an impact on the vendors in the space. So I guess I'm not really looking to see any evidence of that this year, but it'll be interesting to compare this year's show floor to next year's, I think.
Espen, what are your thoughts for IBC? What's your plan? What are you looking out for? What are you doing?
Yeah, so we are obviously exhibiting. We're in Hall 14. We have done a lot of product development lately on our front-end apps framework and things like that. So I'm super excited to go and present and talk about that. But also, as Eric said, I mean, what I'm always curious to, when I talk to all the operators and the broadcasters out there, is to understand how much thing they are starting to do in-house and not. Because, I mean, as Eric said, I mean, I think that's something you have to do, right? You need to take control over that service, and you can't just outsource and build and have building blocks. You need to take control of that. So there's certain things you have to do in-house and yourself, and it's happening. And yeah, so I'm always, interesting when I talk to people, what are they deciding to do themselves, and what, and I think that will be the trend as well. I mean, people will buy smaller blocks rather than big monolith platforms and complete solutions. And yeah, it's a trend that I've seen, and yeah, I'm excited to see where this is going and continuing.
Cool stuff. Have you got a stand there? Are you exhibiting?
Yes, we have a stand. So we're in Hall 14. I'm not exactly sure about the number, but you will find Norwegian media there.
Excellent. Cool. I'll come and find you, and feel free to let us know. We'll post it out on the Twitter feeds, both you and Diane, and make sure people know where to find you on our SMAF social feeds and so on. Mark is saying must be rush hour in Oslo. Oh no, I thought you were saying you had to rush there, Mark. Excellent. Mark, you're not going to IBC, are you? What are you going to do in the meanwhile?
Alas, I am not. We've got too many projects going on right now for me to skip town. But next year for sure, I will join you there.
That'll be done, and I will see you at Streaming Media West anyway. I think it's
indeed, sir. It's actually scheduled this year opposite of, or not opposite of BlizzCon, so I will actually be able to attend the entire show.
Fantastic, excellent. And Tim, what's your plan? I know we're catching up on a few occasions as well with Eric.
Yeah, we are, and my plan's actually I'm bringing innovation with this compression company that I've been working with in stealth mode, but also looking for innovation on the show floor. One of the things that I like about IBC is you can find a lot of companies, small companies who are European based. That's sort of their first big show, and they've got innovative ideas, and then to be able to talk to them about what the differences are in the markets like the US or in India or in Africa compared to the European market. So.
Cool. Well, Diane's just mentioned her battery is at 2%, so let's quickly say goodbye to Diane. See you a week on Saturday, Diane, if not before. I will be at the beach from 4 o'clock onwards on Friday, so expect to see me with some more of this. Oh, hold on a sec. I'll just there you go, a few more of these. I shall raise a glass to Mark, who are in your absence, and we will
Thank you, sir.
all drink together at some other occasion, because, of course, we're working hard and being serious. I will be touting Chipcaster a little bit and doing my normal thing, trying to find people who want to buy big platforms that are really, yeah, anyway, enough of that. Okay, cool. We have enjoyed having you, Diane. Thank you very much. We'll see you next time.
Yeah.
Eric, we'll see you there.
See you there.
Cool. Espen, thanks again for joining us. If you're muted, give us a wave. We think you've got traffic hooting outside. It's your adoring fans waiting to give you a lift to IBC. Great to see you. Thanks for coming on. Tim, as always, thank you again, and I'll see you next week. And Mark, we'll see you in the fullness of time. We have been Streaming Media Advanced Forum. I have been Don Robinson, one of your 4 illustrious hosts, joined by our 2 great guests, and I will see you next time.